What happens when a kid from a steel town grows into the most feared man in professional wrestling? A man so powerful that promoters were scared to cross him. Fans couldn't believe he was real. And even legends admit they would want no part of him in a real fight. This is the story of Bruiser Brody, a man whose life was larger than the business and whose death shook it to its core. And it all began long before he ever stepped into a ring. Frank Donald Goodish was born on June 18, 1946, in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, a small city in the mountains. The Goodish family moved to Warren, Michigan, a suburb north of Detroit, where young Frank grew up. He was the only boy in the family, with 3 sisters. His sisters later said he had a lot of charm, but also a wild side that hinted at the rebel he would become. Pro wrestling was not even on the family's mind back then. Instead, Frank put all his energy into sports, and football became his first love. Frank was huge, standing well over 6 feet tall before he even finished growing. He was bigger than almost all his classmates at Warren High School. His athletic skills matched his size. He was a standout on the football team and also played basketball. He was so good that he earned all-state honors in both sports. With his size and talent, college programs took notice. Iowa State University gave Frank a football scholarship, giving him a chance to play at the college level. He did okay in his classes, but his attitude got him in trouble. He had a rebel streak and always wanted to do things his own way, which caused problems with coaches and teachers. After just 1 year at Iowa State, Frank had to look for a new school. He made a big move to West Texas State University. The school was in a small town called Canyon, near Amarillo. Nobody knew it at the time, but this small school would end up producing a bunch of future pro wrestlers. Frank's teammates included Stan Hansen, who would become one of his best friends and tag team partners, and Terry Funk, who would later help get Frank into the wrestling business. Mercury Morris was also on the team, but he went a different way and ended up winning 2 Super Bowls with the Miami Dolphins. The Funk family connection was really important. Terry's dad, Dory Funk Sr., ran the wrestling promotion in Amarillo, and both Terry and his brother Dory Jr. were wrestlers in the area. Frank started going to matches and saw something he loved. The hard-hitting action reminded him of football. The bond between the wrestlers reminded him of his teammates. And the attention the wrestlers got, being treated like local celebrities, appealed to him. Wrestling had caught his eye. But Frank wasn't done with football just yet. Those same attitude problems that hurt him at Iowa State came back in Texas. After 2 years at West Texas State, his college days were over. But he still dreamed of playing pro football. In 1968, Frank moved to San Antonio, Texas, and joined the Toros of the Texas Football League, a minor league team. He also got a job working as a sports writer. For the next 2 years, he bounced around between different semi-pro teams, keeping his football dream alive until 1970, when he got a big chance. The Washington Redskins invited Frank to training camp. He got to work with legendary coach Vince Lombardi. Working under Lombardi taught Frank a hard lesson. He had the physical tools to make it. He was just as fast and tough as anyone else on the field, but he never learned the basics the right way. While other players had been drilling fundamentals for years, Frank was basically starting from scratch. All those years of rebellion had cost him. Things got worse when Lombardi died of cancer on September 3, 1970. Frank had already been released on July 28th, and with his biggest supporter gone, there was no second chance. He tried one more time with the Edmonton Eskimos in the Canadian Football League, but that did not work out either. At 24 years old, he came back to San Antonio with no idea what to do next. Frank took a job working on a loading dock to pay the bills. Football was over, but he never stopped working out. He lifted weights like crazy and kept himself in great shape. Standing around 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing over 250 pounds of muscle, Frank was hard to miss. Another guy who loved lifting weights noticed him. His name was Joe Bednarski, but wrestling fans knew him as Ivan Putski, the Polish Power. Putski worked the Texas wrestling scene for promoter Fritz Von Erich out of Dallas. He was making good money and thought Frank would be perfect for wrestling. After training with Putski for several weeks, Frank met Fritz Von Erich, who was blown away by Frank's look. Fritz took Frank under his wing and taught him the basics of pro wrestling. Frank also learned from other trainers, including Lou Thesz, Buck Robley, and The Sheik. This time, Frank was ready to learn. He had wasted his football talent by not working hard on the fundamentals, and he was not going to make that mistake again. Frank Goodish made his pro wrestling debut in 1973. One of his earliest high-profile matches was a lights-out match against Bob Roop, which helped establish him as someone to watch. The big newcomer impressed everyone with his guts and raw talent, and fans could see he had something special. Fritz sent Frank to the tri-state territory run by Bill Watts and Leroy McGuirk, where Frank mostly worked in Louisiana. He started in the opening matches, but he was ready for bigger things fast. Fritz Von Erich was known for being really stiff in the ring, rarely holding back on his punches, so Frank was well prepared for the hard-hitting style. Frank got back together with his old college teammate Stan Hansen, and they won the Tri-State Tag Team Championship in October 1974, beating Johnny Eagles and Terry Latham. It was Frank's first title. They held the belts for 9 months across 3 different reigns, with only a couple of brief losses before getting them back. Danny Hodge and Jay Clayton finally took the titles for good. That run made both Frank and Hansen look like stars in the territory. Along with what Fritz taught him, Frank learned from other wrestlers in Tri-State like Grizzly Smith, Buck Robley, and Danny Hodge. Robley also taught him about the business side of wrestling and how to handle money on the road. This practical knowledge would help Frank become one of wrestling's smartest businessmen. When the Tri-State run ended, Hansen headed to Japan, while Frank went back to Texas and the Funk's Western States Wrestling. Now called Frank the Hammer Goodish, his time in Western States was short but busy. His very first match there put him against Terry Funk, the man who had first shown him wrestling years earlier. Frank teamed with killer Tim Brooks against Funk and Ricky Romero. This started a rivalry that would last more than 10 years. Frank and Funk would have wild, bloody matches in different promotions across the world. Both men embraced the violent side of wrestling and sometimes went a little crazy. They left pools of blood on the mat and silenced fans who thought wrestling was fake. That first match at Judging Arena in El Paso on October 6, 1975, ended in a double disqualification, just a taste of what was to come. Within 11 days of arriving, Frank had already been in a rematch, this time with a steel fence around the ring. On October 17, 1975, he won his first singles title by beating Ray Candy for the Western States Heavyweight Championship at Fair Park Coliseum in Lubbock. He held that title for 2 months, proving he was ready to be a main event performer. After losing the Western States title to Scott Casey, Frank headed to Florida Championship Wrestling, run by the legendary Eddie Graham. The territories Frank had worked before focused on hard-hitting action. In Florida, promoters wanted a more athletic style. Despite his huge size, Frank surprised everyone with how well he could move. Working with great wrestlers like Jack Briscoe, Jerry Briscoe, and Billy Robinson made him even better. On December 31, 1975, Frank beat Rocky Johnson for the Florida Heavyweight Championship. He held it for 27 days before losing to Thunderbolt Patterson on January 27, 1976. The title run gave him TV time and a chance to work on his talking skills. His promos were already impressing people. 6 months in Florida made Vince McMahon Sr. take notice, and he wanted Frank for his Worldwide Wrestling Federation. McMahon Sr. wanted Frank to be the unstoppable monster who would challenge Worldwide Wrestling Federation champion Bruno Sammartino. Bruno was about 2.5 years into his second title run at the time, having won the belt on December 10, 1973. Eddie Graham gave his blessing, and Frank headed to New York, where his career would change forever. McMahon Sr. set up a photo of Frank standing next to a giant movie poster of the original King Kong climbing the Empire State Building. That picture got the attention of people all over the wrestling world, including Gary Hart, a manager and booker working in Texas. More importantly, McMahon Sr. gave Frank a new name that he would use for the rest of his life: Bruiser Brody. McMahon Sr. did not like the name Goodish because it had the word good in it, so he picked the Irish-sounding Brody instead. The newly named Bruiser Brody got the Grand Wizard as his manager and strict orders about how to present himself. He would crush a bunch of smaller wrestlers on TV without selling anything. Only when he faced Bruno would Brody finally show that he could be hurt. This made him look like an unstoppable beast that only the champion could handle. Brody made his Madison Square Garden debut on August 7, 1976 in a squash match against Kevin Sullivan. This was part of his build-up as an unstoppable monster. Among the other wrestlers Brody faced during this period was Jose Gonzalez, a Puerto Rican wrestler who had come to New York around the same time. Gonzalez was working tag team matches and building his own career, though he was not getting the same kind of push Brody was receiving. Brody's relationship with Worldwide Wrestling Federation management would eventually sour. At one point, Brody and Gorilla Monsoon got into a backstage fight, which hurt Brody's standing with the company. This kind of conflict with authority would become a pattern throughout his career. Brody did not take orders well, and he was not afraid to stand up for himself, even if it cost him opportunities. After his build-up, Bruiser Brody stepped into Madison Square Garden for championship matches against Bruno Sammartino. Following the plan, Brody started selling for the champion. He would later describe Bruno as strong as a bear. Fans who had watched Brody destroy everyone for weeks went crazy seeing their hero actually hurt the big monster. They wanted more. Bruno always kept his belt in their matches, either winning outright or through double disqualifications that made both guys look strong. During this run, Brody also teamed up briefly with Stan Hansen again, and even faced Ivan Putski, the man who got him into wrestling. After his Worldwide Wrestling Federation run, it was time to move on. Fritz Von Erich had been watching Brody's progress, especially after seeing that King Kong photo. Fritz and Gary Hart were eager to bring this rising star back to Dallas. Brody seemed just as excited to return to where it all started. He and Hart clicked right away, both personally and professionally. Brody also grew very close to the Von Erich family. Kevin Von Erich would later say Brody was like a big brother, and Fritz treated him almost like another son. Kevin credited Brody with helping both him and David when they were still new and nervous about working in front of big crowds. Having Brody around made everything easier. In front of the fans, Brody joined Gary Hart's group of bad guys, which automatically made him an enemy of Fritz, since Hart and Von Erich had been feuding for years. The American Heavyweight Championship, the top singles title in Dallas, was at the center of their battles. On January 3, 1977, Fritz lost the American title to Brody, starting a reign that lasted more than 200 days. Fritz got the belt back briefly on April 12th, but Brody regained it the very next day, on April 13th. The fact that Fritz would lose the title to Brody twice and let him hold it for over half the year showed how much he valued Brody. Besides defending the American title against guys like Jose Lothario and Lord Alfred Hayes, Brody also picked up the Texas Tag Team Championship with Mike York on April 15, 1977, and the Texas Brass Knucks Championship, which he would hold 8 times throughout his career. Brody also had 2 matches against NWA World Champion Harley Race, with Race winning on May 16, 1977 in Fort Worth, and the 2 fighting to a draw the next night on May 17th in Dallas. Behind the scenes, Brody kept learning about the business. He picked Gary Hart's brain about booking and even talked Hart into giving him an old NWA directory full of phone numbers for promoters all over the country. Brody wanted the freedom to find his own work instead of waiting for bookers to call him. Brody was famous for not trusting promoters, with Fritz Von Erich being one of the few exceptions. He did not want to stay in one place full-time. Even though Dallas was a good home base with chances to work in Houston and other nearby territories, there was a whole world of wrestling out there with money to be made. After losing a loser, Lee's Texas match to John Studd on July 25, 1977, with Bull Curry as the referee, Brody set off on a long tour of Australia and New Zealand. While his matches entertained fans, the trip mattered most for the people he met and the lessons he learned. He grew closer to two wrestlers he already knew, King Curtis Iaukea and Maniac Mark Lewin. Both were independent performers who had found success working outside the United States. Curtis had a big impact on Brody. He made Brody believe in himself even more, and he taught him about the value of bleeding during matches. Not just getting color, but knowing exactly when to blade for the biggest reaction from the crowd. Outside of wrestling, the trip changed Brody's personal life completely. A young woman from New Zealand, working at a hotel in Australia, caught his eye. Even though hotel rules said she could not hang out with guests, Brody convinced her to meet a group of wrestlers at a nearby bar. Her name was Barbara, and she would become his wife. By May 1978, Brody returned to Dallas and started feuding with the Von Erichs again. He also worked in Houston, Tri-State, Central States Wrestling, in Kansas City, and St. Louis. In St. Louis, he worked as King Kong Brody out of respect for Dick the Bruiser, who regularly appeared there. But Dallas was where he spent most of his time and made most of his money. Still part of Gary Hart's group, Brody quickly won the Texas Heavyweight Championship from Dale Valentine, who later became known as Buddy Roberts. He held that title for over 100 days before losing to David Von Erich. By the end of 1978, Brody had made himself a top star in Dallas, St. Louis, and Kansas City. He was one of the hottest names in all of wrestling. But there was one more place he needed to conquer. With help from Dory Jr. and Terry Funk, Bruiser Brody made his first appearance in All Japan Pro Wrestling on January 2, 1979 at the New Year Giant Series in Tokyo. For his debut, Brody teamed with King Curtis Iaukea to defeat Giant Barber and the Destroyer. Just like he did for Bruno in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation and for Fritz in Dallas, Brody came off as an unstoppable monster. He didn't sell anything for anyone except Japan's biggest stars like Jumbo Tsuruta and Giant Baba. Japanese fans were amazed by Brody, and the crazier he got, the more they loved it. Even though his first Japan run was only about a month long, it was such a hit that American promoters were fighting to get him into their territory. Brody came back to America and to Dallas, but in a new role. Gary Hart turned on Brody, ordering Maniac Mark Lewin to attack him with a ring bell hammer. When Brody returned, fans cheered because they wanted to see him get revenge on the hated Hart. Brody beat Lewin in a lumberjack match at the Sportatorium, but that was just the beginning. He went after everyone in Hart's group, fighting the Spoiler and Gino Hernandez while building his popularity with fans. In a partnership nobody would have expected a few months earlier, Brody even teamed with the beloved Andre the Giant in a handicap match against Lewin, the Spoiler, and Hart in Fort Worth. But in Dallas, a wrestler was not really accepted as a good guy until the Von Erichs welcomed him. Finally, Brody tagged with Fritz Von Erich at the Sportatorium against Lewin and the Spoiler. These two men who had spent years fighting each other were now on the same side. If Fritz trusted Brody enough to be his partner, the fans figured they could trust him too. Brody went on to win the Texas Tag Team Championship with Kerry Von Erich. They held the titles twice in 1979, making Brody's bond with the Von Erichs even stronger. While doing well in Texas, Brody kept working in other places too. He beat Dick the Bruiser for the WWA World Championship in the small Indianapolis promotion on August 4, 1979. He held that title for about 301 days, losing it on May 31, 1980. That was impressive, since Dick the Bruiser owned the promotion and did not really like Brody's attitude about money. This showed how Brody dealt with promoters who he felt did not pay him fairly. When Brody thought he got short-changed after a match, he did not hold back. He confronted the older wrestler, and the argument got physical. Brody easily got the better of the veteran, who was 17 years older. A few days later, Dick the Bruiser found Brody outside the locker room and handed him a check. Brody thanked him, and they went on with their business. This kind of thing happened many times with different promoters throughout Brody's career. They would pay him right or deal with the consequences. But they kept bringing him back because having Bruiser Brody on the card meant money at the gate. Through the early 1980s, Brody became one of wrestling's top stars. He could draw a crowd anywhere, but nowhere more than Japan, where he was one of the highest-paid wrestlers in the business. His legendary blood-soaked matches against Abdullah the Butcher became must-see events, starting a rivalry that would go on for years. Back then, before cable television brought wrestling from everywhere into people's homes, a wrestler could work in different areas under different names without most fans knowing. While Bruiser Brody tagged with the Von Erichs in Dallas, King Kong Brody fought them in St. Louis. Many American fans had no idea Brody had a successful tag team with Jimmy Snuka in Japan. But things were changing. Wrestling magazines were spreading news and pictures from around the world, and shows like Georgia Championship Wrestling on WTBS were reaching more people. Brody had built his character to fit any situation. He was a good guy when he needed to be, and a bad guy when he needed to be. His wrestling character never really changed. He was a mercenary, a gun for hire. After feuding with Gary Hart's newest star, the Great Kabuki, in 1981, Brody spent a lot of time away from Dallas, traveling the wrestling world. In Georgia and the Mid-Atlantic, he battled Blackjack Mulligan and challenged Dusty Rhodes for the NWA World title. On 2 big Japan tours, Brody beat Dory Funk Jr. for the NWA International Championship, and he won the Real World Tag League with Jimmy Snuka over the Funk Brothers. He also got back together with Stan Hansen. In Houston, Brody and Dick Slater won the Southwest Championship Wrestling Tag titles from Gino Hernandez and Tully Blanchard in a steel cage match. In Florida, he teamed with John Studd against Dusty Rhodes and Butch Reed. When Brody came back to Dallas in June 1983, the territory had become world-class championship wrestling and was the hottest thing in wrestling. The red-hot feud between the Von Erichs and the Freebirds was driving world-class's success, and Brody jumped right in. At the World-Class Wrestling Star Wars event at Reunion Arena on June 17, 1983, with about 21,000 fans in attendance, Brody teamed with Gary Von Erich to win the American Tag Team Championship from Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy. Great singles matches against the Freebirds followed, especially against Gordy, as the 2 big men tore the house down. Brody found his own rivalry when Kamala the Ugandan Giant showed up. Their first clash at the Independence Day Star Wars card on July 4, 1983, ended in a double disqualification. Over the next 3 years, Brody and Kamala met many times in lumberjack matches, Falls Count Anywhere matches, and they brought their feud to other territories too. Most of their matches ended in double disqualification. They always brought blood, and neither man ever looked weak or beaten. Brody loved working in world class, but his plan to stay a worldwide star meant he had to keep moving. As the World Wrestling Federation started going national, Brody became the star that other territories needed to boost their attendance. Plus, the money in Japan was just too good to pass up. In February 1984, Brody and David Von Erich were set for a Japan tour, as the Von Erichs had become international stars themselves. On February 10, 1984, the first day of the tour, David did not come down from his hotel room. Brody, Japanese official Joe Higuchi, and wrestler Jerry Morrow went to check on him. They found David dead in his bed. A shocked Brody grabbed David's painkillers and flushed them down the toilet, then threw away the empty bottle. He would later say he did not know why he did it. In that moment of shock, he just felt like he was protecting David and the Von Erich family. Painkillers were common among wrestlers, and Brody had no way of knowing what killed David right then. It was just a reaction. For almost 2 years after David's death, Brody mostly worked in Japan, including a jump to All Japan's rival New Japan Pro Wrestling. He also had a long run in the AWA, feuding with Crusher Blackwell and challenging Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA World Championship. Laverne Clarence's promotion had been struggling after the World Wrestling Federation took most of their top talent, but Brody's drawing power helped keep the AWA going a little longer. He also had shorter runs in places like Memphis, where he battled Jerry Lawler and the Fabulous Ones. In 1986, Brody returned to Dallas, now called the World Class Wrestling Association, after the promotion left the National Wrestling Alliance. This time, Brody wasn't just a wrestler, he was also the booker, sharing those duties with referee David Manning while still working for other promotions. He faced Hart's men like one-man gang, and he continued his long feud with Abdullah the Butcher. The Abdullah feud led to a loser leaves steel cage match at the 1986 Christmas Star Wars card at Reunion Arena. Abdullah won and forced Brody to leave the World Class Wrestling Association. Brody spent most of the next month in Florida, including a famous steel cage match against Lex Luger, when Luger suddenly climbed out of the ring and ran away. In early 1987, a masked wrestler calling himself Red River Jack showed up in World Class. Brody was not allowed to wrestle there because of his loss to Abdullah. World Class officials said they could not prove Red River Jack was Brody, even as Gary Hart kept complaining. At one point, Brody appeared alongside Red River Jack to challenge Hart. The man in the mask that night was Rick Davidson. Eventually, Brody was reinstated, but he continued to appear both as himself and as Red River Jack, which added a new twist to his rivalry with Hart. In November 1987, Brody started another money-making run in Japan, returning to All Japan Pro Wrestling. His earlier jump to New Japan may have caused tension with Giant Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta, and things seemed more strained than usual. Brody took a short break from Japan, and he made the decision that would change everything. He agreed to work in Puerto Rico for Carlos Colon's World Wrestling Council. Brody had worked Puerto Rico before. In 1984, he teamed with Stan Hansen against Abdullah the Butcher and Carlos Colon in a series of matches that drew amazing crowds. Almost 28,000 fans came to Roberto Clemente Stadium in San Juan on June 2, 1984 for the first match, with the other two bringing in around 20,000 each. Those were incredible numbers for anywhere in 1984, but for a small place like Puerto Rico, they were almost unbelievable. Promoters in Puerto Rico were known for being hard to work with, which is why Hansen stopped going. But the chance to make big money kept drawing Brody back. The booker Brody had to deal with was Jose Gonzalez, who also wrestled in the main events as Invader No. 1. It is unclear if Brody even remembered working with him years earlier in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, but Gonzalez's arrogant attitude quickly annoyed Brody. Just like he did with any other authority figure he did not respect, Brody let Gonzalez know exactly what he thought of him. Things got so bad that Brody would embarrass Gonzalez in front of the other wrestlers, often yelling at him about planned finishes. Then Brody would double-cross him and change the finish in the ring. This was probably something Brody had done before with other bookers he did not get along with. Promoters usually put up with it because Brody drew money. Gonzalez could not handle it. On March 26, 1988, Brody began his last run in Japan. He won the International Heavyweight Championship from Jumbo Tsuruta on March 27, 1988, and he dropped it back to Tsuruta on April 19, 1988. It was the last championship bruiser Brody ever won. After Japan, Brody made his final world-class appearance at the 5th and last Memorial Parade of Champions at Texas Stadium on May 7th and 8th, 1988. He teamed with Kevin Von Erich to beat Buddy Roberts and Solomon Grundy. Brody took some time off after the show to be with his wife Barbara, who was pregnant with their second child. Sadly, she lost the baby. Still dealing with that loss, Brody headed to Puerto Rico less than a week later for his scheduled dates. Brody's last two matches were a double disqualification against Abdullah the Butcher on July 13, 1988, and a tag team loss with Carlos Colon against Abdullah and Dan Spivey on July 15th in Ponce, Puerto Rico. Despite earlier problems with pay, Brody was said to be calm and confident on this trip, feeling like the money issues were behind him. Brody and Gonzalez actually rode together to at least one of the shows and were at the same party the night before Brody's final match. When they were not talking about wrestling and money, there did not seem to be much tension between them. On July 16, 1988, at an outdoor show in a baseball stadium in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, Brody was in the locker room talking to Tony Atlas about doing a painting of his son. Gonzalez walked by with a towel and asked Brody to come talk to him in the shower area. This was nothing unusual in wrestling locker rooms, especially when bookers were involved. The wrestlers who were there give slightly different accounts, but they all say there were sounds of a struggle and a scream of pain coming from the shower. Tony Atlas was the first one there and saw Brody stumble out with a shocked look on his face before falling to the floor. Gonzalez had hidden a knife in the towel. Because of the large crowd, it took the ambulance almost 30 minutes to get to the stadium. Tony Atlas helped get Brody into the ambulance and rode with him to the local hospital, El Centro Medico. There are different stories about what happened at the hospital, but they all end the same way. At 5:40 a.m. on July 17, 1988, Bruiser Brody was pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. Jose Gonzalez went to trial. He was first charged with first-degree murder, but that was reduced to involuntary homicide under Puerto Rico law. The American wrestlers who were there were not told about the trial date in time to appear as witnesses. Dutch Mantel said he got a subpoena the day after the trial was already over. Gonzalez claimed self-defense, and the jury found him not guilty. The wrestling world was shocked and angry. Many American wrestlers refused to ever go back to Puerto Rico. Bobby Jaggers, who was on the July 16th card with Brody, was deeply affected by the tragedy and eventually phased out of the business, retiring in 1991. Gonzalez kept working for Carlos Colon, who had testified on Gonzalez's behalf at the trial. Pro Wrestling lost Bruiser Brody that night in Puerto Rico, but a wife lost her husband and a son lost his father. They were left wondering what might have been in the years to come. What Brody might have done in the 1990s is something wrestling fans still debate, but what is clear is the legacy he left behind, one that has lasted into the 21st century. Like and subscribe for more Territory Wrestling documentaries. Until next time.